In the dark waters of the Pacific Ocean, October 25th, 1944, at precisely 2:30 in the morning, a single torpedo breaks the surface of the Taiwan Strait. But this torpedo isn't heading toward an enemy ship. It's circling back toward the American submarine that just fired it, the USS Tang, America's most lethal submarine. The boat that had sunk more Japanese ships than any other in the Pacific was about to become the victim of its own final weapon. This is the story of extraordinary courage, devastating success, and tragic irony. This is the story of the USS Tang. The contract to build the USS Tang was awarded to Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California on December 15, 1941, just 8 days after Pearl Harbor plunged America into World War II. Her keel was laid down on January 15, 1943, and she was launched 7 months later on August 17, 1943. The Tang was a Balao-class submarine, cutting-edge naval technology for the time. She measured 311 feet and 9 inches in length. She displaced 1,526 tons on the surface and 2,424 tons when submerged. Her diesel-electric propulsion system was impressive. 4 Fairbanks Morse main generator diesel engines produce 5,400 horsepower. 4 Elliott Motor Company main motors generated 2,740 horsepower. She could travel at 20 knots on the surface and 18 knots while submerged. But what made the Tang truly formidable was her armament. 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward, 4 aft. She carried 24 torpedoes. She also had one 4-inch 50 caliber deck gun and 2 20-millimeter guns. The Tang was commissioned on October 15, 1943, at Mare Island Navy Yard, and she had a commander who would become a legend in his own right, Lieutenant Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane. Richard O'Kane was born on February 2, 1911, in Dover, New Hampshire. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1934. After serving on surface ships, he transitioned to submarines in 1938. But O'Kane's real education in submarine warfare came aboard the USS WWII. He served as executive officer under Lieutenant Commander Dudley Mush Morton. Together, they revolutionized submarine tactics in the Pacific. Morton preferred to run the demanding analysis and plots, while his executive officer manned the periscopes, a reversal of standard practices. Under Morton's tutelage, O'Kane developed the skills that would make him the single most accomplished American submarine commander in history. The WWII was incredibly successful. Over 5 war patrols with O'Kane aboard, they were credited with sinking nearly 95,000 tons of enemy shipping during just the final 3 patrols. O'Kane and Morton even had a lucky cribbage board. In 1943, as the WWII headed to the LOC, Morton dealt O'Kane a perfect 29 hand. That night, the WWII sank 2 Japanese freighters. A few days later, Morton dealt O'Kane a 28-point hand, and in the next 2 days, the WWII sunk 3 freighters. In July 1943, following his 5th patrol on the WWII, O'Kane was detached, promoted to lieutenant commander, and made prospective commanding officer of the USS Tang, then under construction. Unbeknownst to O'Kane, just 4 days before he commissioned the Tang on October 15, the USS WWII was sunk in the La Perouse Strait by Japanese forces. All 79 crew members were killed, including Lieutenant Commander Dudley Mush Morton. O'Kane would carry the memory of his mentor and his fallen comrades with him throughout the Tang's career. The Tang completed fitting out at Mare Island and moved south to San Diego for 18 days of intensive training. She arrived at Pearl Harbor on January 8, 1944, and conducted 2 more weeks of exercises in preparation for combat. The crew was ready. Commander O'Kane was ready. On January 22, 1944, the USS Tang stood out of Pearl Harbor to begin her first war patrol. The Tang's first patrol area was the Caroline Islands and Mariana Islands region. Thousands of miles of open Pacific Ocean, Japanese-controlled waters. For nearly a month they patrolled, searching for enemy ships. Then on the morning of February 17th, 1944, everything changed. Before sunrise, the Tang sighted a convoy, two freighters, five smaller ships, and their escort. The submarine tracked the convoy carefully, plotting its course. O'Kane prepared to attack. Then suddenly an escort appeared. Range, 7,000 yards, and closing fast. O'Kane ordered the Tang deep. 5 depth charges exploded around them. The submarine shuddered. Men held their breath. Equipment rattled. But the Tang was undamaged. The escort departed. O'Kane brought the Tang back to periscope depth. They resumed the attack. The range on the nearest freighter close to 1,500 yards. Fire! The Tang fired a spread of 4 torpedoes. 3 hit their target. The 6,800-ton cargo ship, Gyoten Maru, began sinking by the stern. The Tang had drawn first blood. But O'Kane wasn't finished. 5 days later, on February 22nd during the night, the Tang made a surface attack on another convoy, 3 cargo ships and 2 escorts. Rain squalls made radar almost useless. They tracked the Japanese ships for 30 minutes before attaining a firing position, 1,500 yards off the port bow of a freighter. But this target wasn't just any freighter. It was a troop transport, the Fukuyama Maru. After making an end-around run on the surface that produced 2 torpedo misses, the Tang went deep to avoid depth charges. Then she surfaced and chased the target until the range closed to just 750 yards. A single torpedo was fired. It blew the Nikken Maru in half. The transport ship sank, taking with her some 3,200 Japanese soldiers. The next morning, February 23rd, the Tang sighted a tanker and a freighter. While tracking both ships, O'Kane focused on the larger target, the 6,777-ton repair ship Yamashima Maru. 4 torpedoes were fired. Terrific explosions followed. The Yamashima Maru went down. On February 24th, the Tang contacted another convoy, a freighter, a transport, and 4 escorts. She maneuvered into position to attack the wildly zigzagging transport. O'Kane fired the Tang's last 4 torpedoes, but the transport sped up. All 4 torpedoes passed astern. Having expended all 24 torpedoes, the Tang headed to Midway Island for refit. 16 hits out of 24 attempts, 5 ships sunk. Not bad for a first patrol, but for O'Kane and the Tang, this was only the beginning. The Tang's second war patrol began on March 16th, 1944. This time, she was ordered to patrol waters around the Palau Islands, to Davao Gulf, and to the approaches to Truk. Truk Atoll was Japan's main naval base in the South Pacific. It was known as the Gibraltar of the Pacific, heavily fortified, dangerous waters. During this patrol, the Tang made only 5 surface contacts. She had no opportunity to launch an attack on enemy vessels. But this patrol would prove the Tang's worth in a completely different way. She was assigned to lifeguard duty near Truk. During major carrier airstrikes on Japanese positions, American pilots faced intense anti-aircraft fire. Many were shot down. They parachuted into enemy-controlled waters, facing almost certain death or capture. The Tang's mission was to rescue these downed aviators, and rescue them she did. On April 29th and May 1st, during carrier strikes on Truk, the Tang rescued an unprecedented 22 downed airmen, 22 lives saved. One remarkable moment was captured in photographs. A WWII Kingfisher floatplane from the USS North Carolina had landed inside Truk Lagoon to recover downed airmen. But unable to take off with such a heavy load, the pilot taxied out to where the Tang was waiting. The Tang took aboard the aircraft crew and all the rescued aviators. This single mission set a record for submarine rescue operations. It earned the crew a Presidential Unit citation, and it demonstrated that O'Kane and his crew were not just killers of ships. They were saviors of men. When the Tang returned to Hawaii at the end of this patrol, she carried 22 grateful aviators, men who owed their lives to the courage of the Tang and her crew. Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane posed for photographs with all 22 rescued air crewmen. The photo would become iconic. It showed what submarine warfare was really about. Not just destruction, but salvation. On June 8, 1944, the USS Tang departed Pearl Harbor for her third war patrol. This patrol would go down in history as one of the most devastating American submarine deployments carried out against Japanese shipping during World War II. The Tang was ordered to hunt enemy shipping in the East China Sea and Yellow Sea areas. These were dangerous waters, close to the Japanese home islands, heavily patrolled, heavily protected. O'Kane was undeterred. For 2 weeks, the Tang prowled the shipping lanes. Then on June 24th, southwest of Kagoshima, the Tang's radar picked up a massive contact, a convoy, 6 large ships, guarded by 16 escorts, against one submarine. Most commanders would have thought twice. O'Kane didn't hesitate. The Tang closed for a surface attack. It was late at night. Darkness provided some cover, but the risk was enormous. O'Kane fired a spread of 3 torpedoes at one of the ships. Then quickly he fired a similar spread at a second target. Explosions followed. Massive explosions. The Tang reported 2 ships sunk, but something unexpected had happened. The ships in the convoy must have overlapped. The torpedo spread must have hit more than the intended targets. Post-war examination of Japanese records revealed the truth. 4 ships were sunk that night. Not 2, 4. The Tomahoko Maru, 6,780 tons. The Tainan Maru, 3,175 tons. The Nasusan Maru, 4,399 tons. And the Kenichi Maru, 1,937 tons. A total of 16,292 tons of enemy shipping sunk in a single attack. But there was a tragic footnote to this attack that wouldn't be discovered until after the war. The Tomahoko Maru was carrying prisoners of war, British and Dutch prisoners of war. They went down with the ship. The American High Command had been aware of the cargo, but the decision was made to proceed with the attack anyway. War is never without its moral complexities. 6 days later, on June 30th, while patrolling the lane from Kyushu to Dairen, the Tang sighted another cargo ship. This one was steaming without an escort. After making an end-around run on the surface that produced 2 torpedo misses, the Tang went deep to avoid depth charges from an escort that had suddenly appeared. Then she surfaced and chased the target until the range closed to just 750 yards. A single torpedo was fired. It split the ship in half. The cargo ship sank. But this wasn't just any cargo ship. It was carrying Japanese troops, 3,200 soldiers. They all went down with the ship. The next morning, July 1st, the Tang sighted both a tanker and a freighter. O'Kane chose his targets carefully. While the Tang sank the freighter Taiyan Maru No. 2, the tanker Takatori Maru No. 1 fled. The Tang trailed the tanker until dark. Then she launched 2 torpedoes. The tanker sank. On July 4th, Independence Day, the Tang celebrated at dawn with an end-around submerged attack on an enemy freighter near shore. But the water was getting dangerously shallow. The Tang's keel was about to touch bottom. O'Kane drew back slightly, fired a spread of 3 torpedoes with 2 hits, and then surfaced as survivors of the 6,886-ton cargo ship Askazan Maru were being rescued by fishing boats. By the end of this patrol, the Tang had achieved something remarkable. 10 ships sunk, 39,100 tons of enemy shipping sent to the bottom. This remained the best single patrol by any American submarine for the number of ships sunk during the entire war. 10 ships, 1 patrol. The Tang had become a legend. After a refit and rest period, the Tang departed from Midway on July 31st, 1944, for her 4th war patrol. This time, Commander O'Kane had been given an even more dangerous assignment. Japanese home waters off the east coast of Honshu. He was taking the fight directly to Japan's doorstep. For the first 10 days, the Tang prowled the coast searching for targets. Then, on August 11th, She located two enemy freighters with two escorts. The Tang launched 3 torpedoes at the larger freighter and 2 at the smaller ship. One of the torpedoes hit the larger freighter's boilers. The explosion was catastrophic. The 3,328-ton cargo ship Roko Maru exploded and sank. After launching the attack, the Tang went deep. For 38 minutes, depth charges exploded around her. The submarine was rocked by near misses. Equipment shook. Men gritted their teeth. Finally, the Japanese escorts gave up. The Tang resurfaced to periscope level. 3 days later, on August 14th, the Tang sank a Japanese patrol yacht with her deck gun. The gunners reduced the yacht's deckhouse to shambles with 8 direct hits. On August 22nd, she sank a 225-foot patrol boat, the Nansatsu Maru No. 2. Then, on August 23rd, the Tang spotted a large ship. Through the periscope, O'Kane could see Japanese officers in white uniforms lining the superstructure and bridge. A transport, a valuable target. The Tang closed to firing range. 3 torpedoes were launched. 2 hit. The 8,135-ton transport Tsukushi Maru slipped beneath the waves. 2 days later, on August 25th, the Tang concluded her 4th war patrol in style. She sank both a tanker and an escort with her last 3 torpedoes. When the Tang returned to Pearl Harbor, her record spoke for itself. 4 war patrols completed, 17 enemy ships sunk, multiple presidential unit citations. The Tang and her crew were at the peak of their abilities. They were the best submarine crew in the Pacific Fleet. Seasoned, skilled, confident. On September 24, 1944, the USS Tang departed Pearl Harbor for her 5th war patrol. Commander O'Kane had requested a specific patrol area, the Taiwan Strait, between the island of Taiwan and mainland China. These were some of the most heavily patrolled and dangerous waters in the entire Pacific theater. Most commanders would have avoided them. O'Kane sailed straight into them. He couldn't have known that this would be the Tang's final voyage. After topping off fuel at Midway Island on September 27, the Tang headed for the Formosa Strait, which we now know as the Taiwan Strait. To reach her patrol area, the Tang had to pass through narrow waters known to be heavily patrolled by the Japanese. A large area stretching northeast from Formosa was known to have been mined by the enemy. O'Kane was given a choice. He could make the passage north of the island alone, or he could join a coordinated attack group with 3 other submarines under Commander John S. Coy. Junior O'Kane chose to make the passage alone. The other submarines never heard from the Tang after she left Midway. No base ever heard from her again. The story of what happened comes from the report of her surviving commanding officer. For the first 2 weeks of October, the Tang prowled the Formosa Strait. On the morning of October 11th, shortly after dawn, she spotted a large modern diesel freighter. An attack was launched. The freighter was sunk. Over the next 12 days, the Tang continued to hunt. She sank another cargo ship. Every attack was executed with precision. Every torpedo counted. By October 23rd, the Tang had only a handful of torpedoes remaining. That evening, as darkness fell, the Tang's radar began picking up contacts. Many contacts. A massive convoy was approaching. 3 large tankers in column formation, a transport on the starboard hand, a freighter on the port hand, flanked by destroyer escorts on both beams and quarters. It was a heavily escorted convoy carrying vital supplies and reinforcements to support the Japanese campaign at Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. Some of the transports were carrying crates of aircraft piled high on their decks. This was exactly the kind of target O'Kane had come to find. He was down to his last torpedoes. This was the Tang's last chance for a major strike. O'Kane made his decision. He would attack. On the surface, at night, in the middle of the convoy, it was audacious. It was dangerous. It was classic O'Kane. As the Tang tracked the Japanese convoy along the coast, the enemy escorts became suspicious. The escort commander began signaling with a large searchlight, inadvertently illuminating the convoy for O'Kane. Perfect. O'Kane chose his targets carefully, A large three-deck transport, first target, a smaller transport, second target, a large tanker, third target. Their ranges varied from 900 to 1,400 yards. Close, very close. Fire! The Tang fired 2 torpedoes at each target, 6 torpedoes total. Then she paralleled the convoy at high speed to choose her next victims. Explosions erupted across the convoy. The tanker burst into flames. The transport was smashed dead in the water. Chaos spread through the Japanese ships. But then O'Kane saw something that made his blood run cold. 2 cargo ships were bearing down on the Tang. They were trying to ram her. The water was too shallow to dive. O'Kane had to maneuver on the surface. All ahead, flank! The Tang surged forward at maximum speed. She shot through the gap between the 2 Japanese ships, missing them by mere feet. But the 2 Japanese ships couldn't stop in time. They collided with each other. O'Kane immediately swung the Tang around and finished them both off with torpedoes. The sea was now a chaotic battlefield. Blazing tankers lit up the night. Burning oil spread across the water. Explosions continued. The Tang was boxed in by enemy vessels on all sides. Somehow, O'Kane navigated through the mayhem and cleared the area. The Tang had blasted multiple targets and escaped with the convoy in flames behind her. But she still had torpedoes left. 24 hours later, on the evening of October 24th, the Tang made radar contact with another heavily escorted convoy. This was it, the last convoy, the last chance. O'Kane closed on the convoy as they steamed along the coast near Turnabout Island. The submarine's surface search radar showed so many blips it was almost useless. The Tang identified tankers with planes on their decks and transports with crated planes stacked on their bows and sterns. These ships were carrying vital reinforcements to Leyte. O'Kane positioned the Tang and prepared for a final attack. In defiance of relentless enemy fire from all directions, he closed the concentration of ships. Fire! In quick succession, the Tang sent 2 torpedoes each into the first and second transports and an adjacent tanker. Each torpedo found its mark. Violent explosions erupted at less than 1,000-yard range. With ships bearing down from all sides, O'Kane charged the enemy at high speed. The tanker exploded in a burst of flame. The transport was smashed dead in the water. A destroyer approaching the Tang was blasted with a mighty roar that rocked the Tang from stem to stern. O'Kane had expended 22 of his 24 torpedoes. Only 2 remained. Through the smoke and flames, O'Kane spotted a damaged transport. It was dead in the water from an earlier attack. He decided to finish it off. The Tang maneuvered into position. At 2:30 a.m. on October 25, 1944, O'Kane called for a time check. Set! Fire! The 23rd torpedo left the Tang with a shudder. It ran true, heading for the damaged transport. Now for the last torpedo. Torpedo number 24. The very last one. Fire! What happened next would become one of the most tragic moments in submarine warfare history. The 24th torpedo, a Mark 18 electric torpedo, left the Tang. Chief Boatswain's Mate William Liebold was standing on the bridge beside Commander O'Kane. He scanned the waters, watching the torpedo's track. Then something went terribly wrong. The torpedo suddenly broached. It leapt clear of the water, trailing phosphorescence. Then it continued its run, but not toward the target. "There goes that one," Liebold shouted. "Erratic!" The torpedo made a sharp left turn. Then, unbelievably, it turned again. It was running in a circle, heading back toward the Tang. Right full rudder, all ahead emergency. O'Kane's commands were instant, desperate. The Tang's rudder swung hard to starboard. Her engines roared to maximum power. She began to turn, to accelerate. But there wasn't enough time. The torpedo was too close. The Tang was too slow. 20 seconds after it was fired, the torpedo struck the Tang's stern. It hit abreast of the aft torpedo room. The explosion was catastrophic. The blast was so violent that men as far forward as the control room received broken limbs. The aft three compartments flooded instantly. The Tang went down by the stern. Commander O'Kane and 8 other men were on the bridge when the torpedo struck. The force of the explosion threw 3 of them, including O'Kane, clear of the submarine. 1 officer escaped from the flooded conning tower. The others on the bridge went down with the ship. Below in the forward compartments, the surviving crew faced a nightmare. The submarine was sinking rapidly. The aft sections were flooded. Fires were breaking out. Water was rising. The Tang hit bottom at 180 feet. Not deep by submarine standards, but deep enough. About 40 men were still alive, crowded into the forward torpedo room and forward compartments. They were trapped in a steel coffin at the bottom of the Taiwan Strait. But they refused to give up. In the forward torpedo room of the sunken Tang, the survivors faced impossible odds. The compartment was filling with smoke from electrical fires. Carbon monoxide was building up. Oxygen was running out. They had one chance: the Momsen lung. The Momsen lung was a very basic underwater rebreather. It had been developed in the 1930s for emergency submarine escapes, but it had never been successfully used to escape from a sunken submarine in combat conditions. Until now. The men knew what they had to do. They gathered in the forward torpedo room. They burned classified publications. They destroyed sensitive documents. Then they prepared to escape. The procedure was terrifying. 4 men at a time would enter a small escape trunk. They would test their Momsen lungs. Then they would seal themselves into the trunk and allow seawater to fill the enclosure until it was chest level. The pressure inside the trunk had to equal the pressure of the sea outside. At 180 feet, that pressure was enormous. Ears and noses bled. Men's lungs were compressed. Then they would open the door to the outside, release a buoy with an escape line attached, and ascend from 180 feet in darkness in enemy waters. As the escape began, Japanese destroyer escorts were still patrolling above. They dropped depth charges. The explosions rocked the sunken submarine. Fires intensified, but the men kept trying. Some lost their nerve. They rushed for the surface too quickly. The air in their chests expanded so rapidly that their lungs burst. They died in agony before reaching the surface. Others made mistakes with their Momsen lungs and drowned. As many as 24 men attempted the escape. Only 5 made it to the surface in reasonable condition. To this day, they remain the only Americans to escape from a sunken submarine without assistance from the surface. A record born of desperation and courage. On the surface, dawn was breaking. Chief Boatswain's mate William Leibold, who had been thrown from the bridge, treaded water in the darkness. At one point, he thought he saw land. When he looked again, he realized it was only a cloud. Commander O'Kane was also in the water, fighting to stay afloat. One by one, the 5 men who had escaped from below surfaced. Some were coughing blood. Their lungs were damaged from the rapid ascent. 8 men total survived the sinking and reached the surface. Plus, Commander O'Kane made 9. They clung to debris. They helped each other stay afloat. And they waited. Later that morning, a Japanese patrol craft, the P-34, approached. The 9 survivors of the Tang were pulled from the water, but their ordeal was far from over. When the Japanese sailors pulled the Tang survivors from the water, they realized who these men were. These were the submariners who had just sunk their convoy. These were the men responsible for the deaths of their comrades. The beating began immediately. Many of the Japanese sailors were themselves burned and injured from the Tang's attacks. They took out their rage on the prisoners. Commander O'Kane later stated, "When we realized that our clubbing and kickings were being administered by the burned, mutilated survivors of our handiwork, we found we could take it with less prejudice." The prisoners were tied up in the sun for 5 days. They put lighted cigarette butts in their ears and noses. They beat them repeatedly. During the voyage to the southern end of Formosa, they fed them just 2 hardtack biscuits. When they arrived, the men were stripped naked, blindfolded, and led through the streets to a POW camp. Japanese officers who had studied at American universities conducted the interrogations. The survivors spent the entire winter barefoot, but this was just the beginning. In February 1945, the Tang survivors were moved to a secret Japanese naval intelligence interrogation center. It was called Ofuna, on the southern outskirts of Yokohama. Prisoners had another name for it, the torture farm. Conditions at Ofuna were among the worst of any POW camp. Prisoners were held in solitary confinement. They were questioned incessantly under constant threat of death. Food was minimal. Starvation was the norm. Because the Japanese considered submariner attacks on shipping to be war crimes, the Tang survivors were treated even more harshly than other prisoners. They were labeled war criminals. In April 1945, the survivors were moved again to a prison camp at Omori, near Tokyo. The camp was a collection of wooden barracks on a small island about 500 yards from the mainland. It was connected to shore by a causeway. The camp held about 500 Allied prisoners. Conditions were brutal. The prisoners were given 2 bowls of rice a day with a few bits of vegetables. They were forced to work 12 hours a day in factories and on the docks, unloading ships. Men died of malnutrition, disease, and abuse. The Tang survivors watched as American B-29 bombers flew overhead, bombing Tokyo. They could see the fires burning in the distance. They knew the war was turning against Japan, but they also knew that as the situation grew more desperate for their captors, their own situation might become even worse. In August 1945, something extraordinary happened. The guards suddenly became less brutal. Rations improved slightly. Rumors spread through the camp. Something had changed. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over, but the prisoners didn't know it yet. Days passed in uncertainty. Would the guards execute them before the Allies arrived? Would they simply be abandoned? On August 29, 1945, American forces liberated Omori prison camp. The 9 survivors of the USS Tang were finally free. They had been prisoners of war for 10 months. They had endured torture, starvation, and abuse, but they had survived. Of the 87 men who had been aboard the Tang when she sailed on her 5th war patrol, only these 9 lived to see the end of the war. 78 men went down with the submarine or died in the water. They remained entombed in the Tang, resting on the bottom of the Taiwan Strait at 180 feet, a war grave that would remain undisturbed for decades. Commander Richard O'Kane was repatriated and returned to the United States. Despite the ordeal he had endured, despite the weight loss and the trauma, he made it home. And on March 27, 1946, at the White House, President Harry S. Truman awarded him the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, for his extraordinary heroism and distinguished service during the Tang's final patrol. The citation praised O'Kane's conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity. It recognized his aggressive tactics and brilliant seamanship during the Tang's devastating attacks on Japanese shipping. It acknowledged his courage in the face of overwhelming enemy firepower. But the medal came with a heavy burden. O'Kane knew that 78 of his men would never come home. He knew that the Tang's final torpedo, the one that circled back, had been his responsibility. The weight of command is never heavier than when it ends in tragedy. The Tang's war record was extraordinary. Over 5 war patrols spanning less than 1 year, she sank 33 enemy ships, more than any other American submarine in World War II. Her confirmed tonnage sunk was 116,454 tons. When you include the ships that were likely sunk but not confirmed, the number could be even higher. O'Kane himself became the most successful American submarine commander in history. He received the Medal of Honor, 3 Navy Crosses, 3 Silver Stars, and numerous other decorations. But he never forgot the men he lost. He never forgot the USS Wahoo and Mushmorton. He never forgot the price of victory. After the war, O'Kane continued his naval career. He commanded submarine divisions and served in various capacities. He retired as a rear admiral in 1957, but he never stopped thinking about the Tang. about that final patrol, about that last torpedo. In 1977, O'Kane published his memoir, Clear the Bridge, War Patrols of the USS Tang. The book became a classic of submarine warfare literature. It detailed the Tang's operations with precision and honesty. It didn't shy away from the difficult decisions, the close calls, the moments of terror. It honored the men who served aboard the Tang and gave their lives in the service of their country. Richard O'Kane lived until February 16, 1994. He died at the age of 83 in Sebastopol, California. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His headstone bears the simple inscription, Rear Admiral Richard H. O'Kane, Medal of Honor recipient, Commanding Officer, USS Tang. The other survivors of the Tang went on to live their lives, carrying with them the memory of that terrible night in the Taiwan Strait. They had survived the impossible, escaping from a sunken submarine in enemy waters, enduring months of torture and starvation, and living to see their homeland again. Chief Boatswain's mate, William Leibold, who had been on the bridge with O'Kane when the final torpedo struck, lived until 1992. He never forgot the moment when he shouted, "There goes that one!" Erratic as the torpedo began its fatal circle. The story of the USS Tang resonated far beyond the 9 survivors. It became a symbol of both the incredible success and the terrible cost of submarine warfare. The Tang had achieved what no other submarine accomplished, sinking more enemy ships than any boat in the U.S. Navy. But she also demonstrated the thin line between victory and tragedy in naval combat. The Mark 18 electric torpedo that sank the Tang was part of a troubled weapons system. Throughout the war, American torpedoes suffered from numerous defects. They ran too deep. Their magnetic exploders malfunctioned. Their contact exploders failed. Circular runs, like the one that doomed the Tang, were a known problem. O'Kane himself had experienced torpedo malfunctions on previous patrols. After the Tang's loss, the Navy intensified its efforts to fix the torpedo problems. But the damage had been done. The Tang wasn't the only submarine lost to its own torpedo. The USS Tullabee was sunk by a circular run in March 1944. Other submarines experienced near misses. The defective torpedoes cost American lives throughout the war. But despite these problems, American submarines achieved remarkable success in the Pacific. They sank 1,314 enemy ships, totaling 5.3 million tons. They strangled Japan's economy by cutting off vital imports of oil, rubber, and raw materials. They destroyed much of Japan's merchant fleet and a significant portion of its warships. Submarines accounted for 55% of all Japanese shipping losses during the war. The cost was high. The U.S. Navy lost 52 submarines during World War II. 3,506 submariners died, the highest casualty rate of any branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. More than 1 in 5 submariners who served in combat died, but their sacrifice contributed significantly to victory in the Pacific. The USS Tang represented the best of this submarine force. Her crew was skilled, experienced, and aggressive. Her commander was brilliant, daring, and relentless. Together, they achieved what seemed impossible, hunting in the most dangerous waters, attacking the most heavily defended convoys, and sinking more ships than any other submarine in the fleet. Today, the USS Tang rests where she fell, 180 feet beneath the waters of the Taiwan Strait. She is a war grave, protected by international law. The 78 men who died aboard her remain at their posts, honored by their nation and remembered by history. In 1980, a second USS Tang was commissioned, a nuclear-powered attack submarine. She served until 2003, carrying forward the legacy of her predecessor.